Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. I guess we have people all over the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our participants on today's webinar. I'm Trevor Weltman. I'm your Chief of Staff here at the Pacific Asia Travel Association, or PATA, and I'm really excited to welcome everybody today for our webinar, Restoring Post-COVID-19 APAC Travel and Destinations E-Reputations. We have a really interesting presentation happening today. I'm sure many of you have already downloaded our current version of Issues and Trends, which is about today's topic. But the company we've engaged with, and in particular, the CEO, Olivier Henry Biabot, who has joined us today, is a really interesting individual. And this company, with the kinds of insights that they generate for the travel and tourism industry, is quite interesting. To be honest, oftentimes when we look at data for the travel industry, we look at some of the hard numbers, the bookings, the spend, the yield, etc. And what companies like TCI do, and a company like TCI in particular does very well, is looking how to concretize or make hard some of the data that in previous generations was much more difficult to get, which is actually what are people thinking during the decision-making funnel, either before they book, during their booking, after their booking, etc., which point towards the overall sentiment. So I am not an expert on this topic at all, and I will make my comments very brief. But I did want to just quickly give a thank you to everybody joining us. We have, I believe, over 270 people registered and already 73 on call. And Olivier, I'd like to welcome you to turn on your camera and your microphone and just say hello real fast, please. Oh, you're still muted.
Yeah, with a voice, it's probably better. Thanks, Trevor, for the nice introduction, and good morning or good everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. So shall we start?
Yeah, but just before we kicked off, I wanted to say that, you know, TCI is one of our newest partners here at PATA. And as I shared a second ago in the introduction, one of the reasons is the kind of data and insights that you generate for the industry are unique. And as we get through the presentation today, I know what we spoke about ahead of time on the call was how these insights can actually help not only destinations, but other kinds of businesses make business decisions based on this data. And I think it's important because when we looked at all of the questions that came through before the webinar, a lot of the questions are asking, well, what's going to happen post-COVID? How do our destinations open up? What kind of decisions do we need to make now? And as my own small preface to your talk, it's pay attention to the story that the data is telling. And Olivier is going to take us much more deeply into this.
All right. So I'm going to share my screen now. Hope everybody can hear me well and see the screen now.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, Trevor, so I can start?
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So just to manage a bit of your expectations about today, I know that the billion-dollar questions that everybody has in mind and want to know is who is going to travel, where, and when. And I have to say, we're not going to answer that question today. We need to be very honest. I mean, in terms of hard numbers, it's extremely difficult to make some sort of a forecast today, because most of the global market is still driven by supply and possibilities to travel, and less by the demand. So if we just forget a bit the numbers before going into the numbers, but a bit of a common sense forecasting, it's very obvious that in a very short term, so this, in the next 3 months, people will first travel where they can go. So of course it's regionally, of course it's domestically first. It doesn't mean it's a strong demand and a new kind of demand, and people will never go and never travel long haul in the future. It's just because they have no other choice. So yes, sure, in the coming 3 months, they will go travel, regionally, domestically, and then probably by the end of 2020, they will go where they can afford to go, because there is a kind of crisis, an economic crisis going on. So it's also a matter of where can I afford to go in the coming months, and where they have to go. A lot of the business is about visiting friends and relatives, and they will have to go there. And as well as, starting with individual business, So a lot of constraint kind of travel, and then again, probably from 2021, they will at last go where they want to go. And this is exactly where there will be a trade-off and a lot of hesitations about, do I plan again or book again the destinations I wanted to travel to before COVID-19, or do I choose alternative places that maybe will match better my future mood and also the trust I have in a destination? So for that particular big, massive travelers as usual layer, for sure the destinations which have been less or least damaged during the crisis will be the one top of the bucket list, because simply people will tend to favor the destination, the trust, and positive reputation today means higher favorability for choosing the destinations or the attractions tomorrow. It's only one part of the predictive analysis, but it's a very important part, especially for in the times of crisis and post-crisis situation and context. So all the data I'm going to show you come from a data recovery kit that we've put, that actually some are focusing on the heartbeat of destinations, so visitation again, and how far destinations are able to provide the kind of experience that people are now waiting for, and especially in terms of sanitary conditions. We do also a great number of surveys about, you know, the impact on the planning and the bucket list and horizon. But for today, we forget a bit the numbers about planning and look at the, you know, the reputation and destination sentiment index. And when we talk about destination and travel reputation, it's not only about consumer sentiment, it's really the destination or the travel sector's reputation at large from social conversations you can find on any sort of blogs, forums, or online medias, or websites, and shared by anyone. So it could be medias, of course, consumers or companies. It could be DMOs who are doing a lot of efforts to maintain their reputation, but citizens, brands, and officials, anything that can, to a certain extent, influence the way people view travel, tourism, your destinations, your attractions. So we have collected no less than 5 million COVID-19 posts and articles in relation to travel and tourism in Asia Pacific, looking at conversations at large, looking at volumes, and looking at polarity of conversations. So again, we are talking about destination reputation at large. And again, this is not fully predictive of what people are going to do, but it's very important to track the environment and the reputation at large to understand how far you can be favored or not in the future. So 2 parts. The first is about the numbers and the state and dynamic of the sentiment. And then I will go into a specific number of some sort of recommendations on how to restore, and maybe sharing with you a number of case studies for that. But starting with the numbers, from the beginning of the crisis, globally, and not only for Asia Pacific, but globally, there has been 1.5 billion conversations and engagements related to travel and tourism linked with COVID-19. It started actually from the beginning, the conversations was kind of polarizing about Asia and China, of course, in particular, but then very quickly there's been a shift of conversations related to COVID-19 travel in Europe, and there's been a huge peak of conversations when Donald Trump actually decided to impose a travel ban from Europe. Then we had that domino effects across sectors, across verticals, across destinations and market. Stay at home, you know, all the lockdown taking place, and then from beginning of April, we've been in a new era of sentiment, a new timing of sentiment, where the more positive stories have been shared about virtual tourism, a bit of reopening prospects, and clarifications about logistics, about conditions for traveling. So whereas at the very beginning and during probably 3 months, there's been a lot of highly negative stories all over the world about destinations portrayed as, you know, epicenters travel bans, a lot of tourism bashing conversations, destinations being very poor in managing tourist problems, super spreaders, tourist traps in cruises, in hotels and resorts, and a lot of destinations and attractions and events who have been closed in the leisure sector, in the MICE sectors. A lot of stories about airport chaos and destination inefficiency to manage that, illegal bookings, and also many conversations about visitor disrespect, about visitor discrimination, and you know the whole story about how beautiful places can be when there is no visitors at all. There have been so many articles on that, and of course it's not good for our industry. So the good news is that from the beginning of April, we are seeing now a lot of very positive rebound and conversations. So people sharing about their destinations and travel souvenirs and secret sharing, virtual reality, travel from home, a lot of nice conversations about local heroes or great stories about, you know, local heroes, many posts and articles about solidarity in the sector. And then again, in the last months, a lot of conversations again about travel plans, travel desires, and also a lot of conversations right now about what the future experience will be in terms of concrete operational measures for visitors, for making sure they will feel safe in terms of sanitary conditions. And of course, destination reopening, attractions reopening. So the shift of the sentiment, as you can see there, and this particular score is a score I will discuss along throughout the conversation. It's a net sentiment score. So the net sentiment score is just reflecting the balance and the polarity between positive and negative conversations in relation to the topic. And as you can see globally for the whole sector, whatever destination, whatever market, whatever sectors of the travel and tourism industry, whereas it has been really hardly hit, especially from mid of March when the travel bans have been imposed, then gradually it's starting again up, rising slowly but surely. Still not like fully recovered, it's still halfway recovered. And today we are seeing a bit of a wait and see position, especially because of this new post-COVID-19 experience, which is now going up, and people are discussing about, you know, all these conditions for traveling. But still the sector is getting better overall in terms of reputation. Looking now at Asia Pacific as a whole region, so that's the average for all the destinations throughout Asia and Pacific. You see that the overall sentiment, the net sentiment, reflecting again the positivity of conversations about APAC destinations overall. You see, it's been impacted very soon, of course, from the crisis, and it's been for quite some weeks and months, like in the zero position, meaning there were as many negative and positive conversations talking about travel and tourism in association with Asia Pacific as a destination. But the good news is it's rebounding. It has rebounded quite sharply. There's been kind of mid of May, a bit of a negative trend in relation to some fears about a second wave happening, plus other specific industry relations to airlines, a bit of cruise as well, and a bit of politics, of course, as always in sentiment analysis. But it's starting to get very, very sharply on the rise, and Asia Pacific is showing the way of the rebound. And I just checked this morning, the last week net score for Asia Pacific is about 45 points, which basically is meaning that you as an overall region have already restored about 80% of the reputation brand equity, which is, I think, a source of hope. Of course, throughout the crisis, not all destinations have been impacted in the same way. And of course, it all depends on, you know, the number or the impact of very possibly negative stories about the destination as such. Also, many stories through, you know, students or expats, depending on the proximity of the destination to specific attractions or specific travel verticals, such as the cruise industry, for example, which has been quite damaged during the crisis. So depending on that, not all destinations have been impacted the same way. And if you look at that quick ranking, we see obviously China has a very specific status there. It has been kind of portrayed as a destination which has been the source of the pandemic. So it's obviously impacting a bit the image of China overall. But we are seeing for China now a bit of a rebound as soon as domestic traveling is going back on track, and also from very specific attractions, specific sub-destinations in China, which are still very positive in conversations. I will come back to that later on. And then we have different clusters. We have some of the big names, Malaysia, Korea, some of the big hubs in tourism and travel like Hong Kong or Singapore have been a bit impacted in their reputation. It's going up again, but the trace is still there. And then you have a good number of actually destinations which have been somehow spared by the crisis. I'm not talking about, of course, the sanitary problems, but about the reputation problems, depending on how far they've been exposed to negative stories. And we are seeing actually some destinations like Laos or Bhutan or the Maldives or Sri Lanka, which still doesn't have completely restored their reputation, but they have been relatively protected or relatively spared throughout the crisis. And so you're not getting this let's say depressed. You need to know that those scores can be quite volatile. And so whereas we can expect and anticipate that maybe China, it will take at least 6 to maybe 10, 12 months if everything is going okay from now before restoring completely. For some of the destination, it can go faster. It really will depend on, of course, if there is no resurgence of the virus, but also it will depend on the first COVID-19 experience sharing. So the first visitors, how are they going to, what their sentiment and what are they going to share on social platforms? And depending on that, your reputation is going to go up more or less, let's say, faster than maybe your competition. Looking at the markets now, so when I mention market, it means where people have been sharing negative conversations about travel and tourism in Asia Pacific. And as you can see there in the heat map, it's been mostly focusing, or mostly the share of attention about negative stories for Asia Pacific have been shared a lot in basically the US and a bit of Canada and also Europe. And looking or deep diving into specific markets, if we can summarize some of the markets which maybe would require a bit of attention in terms of restoring the brand and restoring your brand perception in the long term, probably US, Canada, UK, and France are the one where the stories have been mostly exposed. And so whereas your focus should be first to attract visitors, again, domestically and in your own region, of course, this is the priority. In maybe mid to long term, those particular markets would need to be restored in terms of pure image and corporate image, because they've been really exposed to negative stories. Now I would like to focus on a very important analysis. Travel and tourism is a mix of so many different experiences, and it's a mix of destinations, attractions, verticals. And when we look at the reputation of specific sectors, or comparing conversations when people talk about shopping, about theme parks, about airports, airlines, etc., we see that the reputation level is very, very diverse and very different. Now, I would like to start with those who have been deeply and hardly impacted negatively. And these are actually the main transport hubs. So we have the airlines companies, we have airports, which are still quite negative in conversations overall, because simply those are not really attractions, travel and tourism wise. These are very important sectors economically. These are very important part of the experience, but it's very difficult for them to get restored, because basically it's a transportation mode. And this is where people and the whole conversations are pointing out as being, probably the place where the risk is the highest. It's difficult for people to project positive emotions and positive experiences for tomorrow going as a passengers through an airport or taking a flight, because there again it's difficult to have positive conversations about that compared to a theme park, compared to a museum, compared to specific destinations. So transportations is a matter of very high concern still today. So as a destination, you need to very much focus on your own ecosystem, including public transportation and all the mobility related issues, which from a pure sentiment point of view are still in a negative side. Then you have some other verticals such as cruise and hotels who have been quite hit hard, but they are recovering now. The cruise industry have been exposed to a lot of negative stories. As you can see, the green curve has been negative for quite some times. And now, thanks to the efforts of the industry on the one hand, but also all the cruise lovers sharing memories, being more and more, let's say, into the dream again, and also hearing nice explanations or nice protocols in place that will be put in the future in the cruise experience. Gradually, still the cruise is not at the level they have to be, but it is restoring quite nicely now. So it doesn't mean to us, it will take really time for the cruise industry to completely restore the confidence level. Because cruise is at the same time a transportation and an entertainment, and you know the perception about you are kind of trapped in a place that you cannot really escape still is a bit in the whole sentiment. So it's going to take time, but it's rebounding. The hotel industry is also now rebounding quite well as soon as people are understanding that the whole hotel industry and hospitality are now making a lot of attention to welcome the visitor in the best safe protocol and guarantees. But you need to know that still in the sentiment, there is a perception that hotels and resorts have been also kind of traps for tourists. There have been a lot of quarantine stories there. And even sometimes the perception that hotels have been sort of satellites of hospitals, because they've been used as well as places for having people quarantining and so on. So it's better. There are also some stories about Airbnb or versus hotels, and sometimes a bit of illegal bookings, sometimes not so responsible ways that the industry have been behaving. But it's starting again, and in the last figures we are seeing now the whole hospitality industry going back on track in terms of reputation. So this slide is important because from this as a destination, you are a combination of many different verticals and experiences, and you really need to focus first in providing the reinsurance where the destination verticals have been mostly impacted. And this is for people very much easier today to dream again and to plan again and book again very specific parts of the experience, a theme park, specific attractions, shopping, these kind of things. It's easier for them to project on this rather than just to project for the country visit as a whole. And I will show you some example of that, which are quite convincing from the data. So from all social conversations, we have defined 19 ways of combating the bad reputation, in fact, and takeaways, to build again a strong sentiment and strong reputation. I'm not going to deep dive into all of them, it's in the report, but just focusing on a few of them and showing exactly what it means in terms of starting the rebound and what you can do for accelerating the pace of recovering. First of all, and this is very important, especially for DMOs. DMOs, I think they really need to multiply cooperation marketing to restore the branding, the brand reputation, together with their most iconic sub-destinations or iconic attractions. The reason is the one I mentioned earlier. the people are now dreaming, very much dreaming again to visit specific attractions or specific sub-destinations within the country, rather than just the idea to visit the country. You have two examples there. China, as I was saying before, is still a bit challenged in terms of reputation overall. So the idea or the sentiment about China as a country overall is still fueled by a number of negative stories. It's going better, but China as a whole, it will take time to fully recover. But when you look at the conversation's polarity, exactly during the same period, so during the COVID-19 period, conversations about the Great Wall in China have been absolutely positive. Conversations about Guilin, for traveling, tourism in Guilin have been during the crisis also extremely positive. So there are a number of sub-destinations, sub-attractions, which have been not impacted at all during the crisis. So it means that maybe not instead of, but as a complement of destination branding, talking about the whole destinations overall, which is important to do, the more you focus your branding on specific attractions, specific sub-brands, the more you keep attentions of potential customers on experiences that have always been a dream for them, and the more you escape from the geopolitics and all the stuff that, when you think about a country and a place overall, sometimes pollute your sentiment towards the place. Same for Japan. Japan has also been quite challenged during the crisis as a whole destination, but the conversations about Kyoto, the conversations about Japan food has always been very, very positive and still are very positive. So they are huge drivers of positive sentiment for your destinations. We did that analysis in I don't know how many destinations, but it always showed the same. It's easier for people to dream again and book again for Disneyland Paris than just visiting Paris, or cycling in Amsterdam versus visiting Amsterdam, or contemplating and envisaging again safari travel in South Africa versus just dreaming about South Africa again. So that is very important in terms of sentiment. One of other aspects is about sustainability. Sustainability is not new. It's just like it already was a concern and a major driver of positiveness for destination before COVID-19. But COVID-19 has been another factor for accelerating the concern from consumers and the whole sentiment about sustainability and environmental protection, but also about mass tourism concerns and so on. And we have there a very interesting example. It's not in Asia Pacific, but it's very inspiring to me. Throughout the crisis in Europe, one particular destination that has been absolutely damaged. It's a destination which is a ski resort in Austria, in Tyrol. It's near Innsbruck, and it's a resort called Ixchel. And that particular ski resort has been always positioned, and their marketing positioning was somehow to be the Ibiza of ski resorts. So it means a lot of crowds and people, going to parties and musics and festivals, and so not really about sports, not really about the nature, but more about gathering for young and students and all this stuff. And throughout the crisis, they have been portrayed as one epicenter of the disease. So just the name of the destination have been portrayed as the cause of the virus super spreading throughout Europe. And so because of that, you see on the graphs there that the sentiment about skiing in Switzerland versus skiing in Tyrol have been so much damaged. And so because of that, they just realized that basically maybe their positioning was not right. And so what they have decided to do from the crisis is to change, completely change their new positioning and their new marketing and branding in order to restore their image. So they are now working on a new campaign, on a new way of delivering the experience to their visitors in order to restore the reputation. And there are many, many examples of how far now because sustainability has been extremely exposed as a topic throughout the conversations, this is a chance for many destinations to take again the leadership on that. And there's another example in Europe of a big theme park, which everybody knows, which is Disneyland Paris. Disneyland Paris still has a great reputation, and they actually restored pretty quickly. And but one thing is, before the crisis, maybe one of the brand value was about it's a destination which is very much linked to mass tourism and maybe not the best sustainable destinations. And this is what they have in their core brand DNA before. And during the crisis, they have done a lot of efforts in communicating on social impacts, on taking care about environment, on very, kind of anecdotal stories about gardening, making contests and everything. And so in terms of reputation, you see that whereas when they close, of course, the reputation has been extremely damaged, but they recovered very fast because they pushed a lot of positive messages about the environment, about the social, care. They have made a lot of donation, a lot of positive stories about health, being generous to the health sector and so on. And so thanks to that, they have created the halo and the sentiment positive drivers that help them to recover very fast. And now people are just waiting for it to reopen. And thanks to proactive, sustainable, and emotional brand activations, they were able to manage restoring their reputation. Another very important aspect is about the relationship between the visitor, the destination, but also between the visitor, other visitors, and the visitors and residents. The COVID-19 is completely changing the way people are going to interact with the destination. It's not only linear. It's not me and the destination, me and the staff in my hotel, me and the staff in information centers, or whatever. It's now the whole problem is the management of the relationship between me, the destination, and other visitors and the residents. And what we've seen from social conversations is unfortunately a lot of conversations about discrimination, about potential tourism phobia. Some residents throughout diverse places in Asia, but also throughout the world, were just saying, we don't want to see whatever Asian visitors in the future, or I'm against tourism now because tourism is the cause of our of the problems and all this stuff. So the resident tourism support is going to be a key component of a reputation rebound, and it has to be really made under surveillance. For one reason, is just because basically from our TRAVELSAT survey, we know that the local people hospitality is the #1 factor shaping visitor satisfaction. So you can have the best tourism products, you can have the best sanitary protocol in place. If your residents are pushing back visitors and tourism, your reputation can be ruined in just 1 to 3 moments. So that relationship with the resident is really important to manage your reputation in the future. And just so you know, we are working again with our friends at PATA to release very soon a resident survey we do it globally, but there will be in 6 or 7 different cities a survey among residents to understand how they still support tourism, hopefully, and maybe which are the elements that should be put on DMOs' attention, so you are sure when you rebound that residents are still on board with you. Celebrating the reopening has been in social conversations a really great moment. It's a massive moment of truth about destinations, about attractions. When you reopen, it's really the moment to celebrate, of course. It's a critical moment to inform about all the sanitary protocol and safety protocol. Well, actually, you shall start that from the beginning of the funnel, mentioning everything which is put in place when people are planning, booking. If you can show videos about what's going to happen when they are in your hotel, or what the destination is doing, or what the airport is doing to guarantee safety about that. Everything about transparency will be welcome. So it's time to celebrate, time to inform. It's probably also time to pay tribute to your local heroes, and not just forgetting. It's just not a happy moment. Oh, come back again, it's safe and we are happy to welcome you. No, it's also probably a time to say we do not forget what's been happening in our destinations or to you. So just the example of Wuhan, who celebrated the first day, they did it in a very smart way, because it's not only about celebrating and enjoyment, but it was made in a way to pay tribute to local hero. And looking at the sentiment score about the place brand and the place or the city net sentiment score, during that particular ceremony, the level of positiveness have gained 82 points. So the more you can, celebrate in a smart way, the better your brand will be restored in a fast way. So time to pay tribute, and it's probably time to also voice your new brand values. I mentioned the ski resort before. When they will reopen during the next ski winter season, for sure they will do a very massive campaign to say, hey, we are not exactly the same. We have taken the lessons. Now we are not only a massive drunk students ski resort, but we are more than that. And this is what we have done to improve your brand experience. So come and visit us. And it's time to reward your guests, and it's probably also time to reward your residents, because they are going to be the one welcoming your visitors in the future. And when you open your destination again, when you open your attractions again, it's obviously too late to test your sanitary protocols. Don't wait for your first visitors to be the one for testing it. You need to train before that, because otherwise, if you have problems, then you will have a bad reputation from TripAdvisor, Google reviews, booking reviews, and so on. So this reopening is a massive moment of truth for connecting again to your visitors, to your residents in a smart and sustainable way. And I will start now finishing a bit my presentation with something which I believe is really important from any conversations we capture from social sentiment analysis. It's especially in Asia Pacific, where you have, you're advanced to compare to other destinations, other regions in the world. So you are seen as a kind of a lab, I would say, from many people, consumers, the industries, the sectors. People are scrutinizing what's going on in Asia and Pacific as a kind of a vision for the near future. And one of the key learning we have from social listening is to say now we have somehow passed a bit the period where you had to keep the emotional link to your attraction, to your destinations. I have to say many destinations have been extremely good in converting or offering experiences from home, virtual reality, activating ambassadors, activating the fan communities. And many destinations actually very soon managed to convert that, from the real reality to virtual reality during the lockdown. So especially attractions, I think just after everything was closed, you had the Louvre museums or UNESCO sites who've been very active in offering virtual visit of museum and stuff like that. So it's fine. And so overall, I think the branding issue is less about keeping the emotional link. There has been a lot of fantastic DMOs campaigns to keep that emotional links, and it's fine, it works. But now the challenge is completely different. The real challenge now in terms of reputation is all about the experience. Your reputation as an attraction, your reputation as a DMO, as a destinations, is not going anymore to be driven mostly by your campaigns or by things that your fans are sharing about souvenirs and secrets, etc. It's going to be driven by the first COVID-19 experience sharing. As you all know probably, and that's something which we measure every day, the first drivers of visitation is not about advertising. It's about friends and relatives recommendations. So the first post-COVID-19 visitors experience and satisfaction will drive your future visitation increase. It will impact the way people will spend, but it will impact the way people will tell their friends, oh, I was in Shanghai and they did a great job in managing the sanitary conditions, so you can go there. And this is all about experience-driven reputations. That's the number one reason why people choose destinations. It's on the experience. So showing this, it means that you need to carefully understand and monitor what people are going to share on all the social platforms about their first experience in your attraction, in your destinations. We've done it, for example, in Shanghai. Disneyland in Shanghai just reopened, and we are looking at what people are saying on social platforms, on rating platforms. And this is very important because we see elements of positiveness, elements of concerns. And this is super important to keep an eye on that, because again, it's a matter of, I think people trust generally that destinations and attractions will have concrete protocols in place. But as soon as they don't leave the experience, they cannot really have their opinion, and they will share their opinion. So you have an example there in terms of managing the experience on, through protocols and through concrete guarantees for visitors. It's not only about communication. It's not only about saying, you can come, it's safe, we have trained our people and everything. It has to be very concrete. So there is an example there in Europe again of a very famous ski resort called Ohrovec. These are great visible and tangible guarantees for the potential visitors. And Portugal is also having a label. So the quick question mark is about creating a new label or just using an existing label and turning it into a positive argument for potential travelers, so they know that when they come, they will be part of an ecosystem which has been very deeply managed. So this was actually the last slide, so I hope you are still there, because I can't hear you anymore.
Sure.
The very last recommendation is to say now it's not time anymore to work too much about pure image communication, but to really work in terms of destination management, because the whole shift of sentiment will be now driven by the experience. So that's the main conclusion. And I think I'm happy to take questions if you have.
Okay, thank you very much, Olivier. What an authoritative and very interesting presentation. I know I had given you a list of questions ahead of time, but actually as a result of your presentation, I have another question I'd like to ask, but first I want to touch on one of the questions that's actually been asked by the audience. If quickly, because I know I had actually asked you when you made the presentation not to touch too much on the methodology or where you guys get the information from, but it seems like there's some questions about that. So if you can just quickly share, where are you guys looking for the sentiment? What are those places, those articles, the key websites, etc.? And how many touch points are you guys analyzing?
Sure. For that particular report and analysis, so we listen to anything which is obviously publicly available. We never go to private conversations from all sort of channels which are online. So it could be basically websites, articles, blogs, and forums. So some of the major social networks. There is a limitation in China in particular, because it's pretty. The API connections can be sometimes a bit restricted. So for China, we are a bit undercovered. I think there's a limitation in the methodology for that because it requires to have specific search on WeChat and Weibo to complete that. So we've actually been listening to above 280,000 of unique sources and authors sharing information, posts, opinions, statements, promotions about COVID-19 in relation to travel and tourism. So it's about social listening. So we have big ears. They listen to everything which is shared in relation to the topic. So depending on the topic, it could be COVID-19 in relation to travel and tourism, or in relation to the cruise, or to specific destinations. And based on that, so it's there's been something like 5 million conversations and articles just for Asia Pacific related to COVID-19. And but overall, as I said, it's 1.5 billion engagement conversations overall about travel and travel. So it's really massive, big data, but the big noise is not interesting. The big noise is pretty easy to capture, by the way, but it's the real added value is to have the proper and the right script to capture what is really relevant in terms of possibly shaping the reputation of a brand, of a destination, or a sector. So, and making the interpretation from that. So this is about the volume. And the polarity and the net sentiment score is just a way to say, look, if somebody is using a specific emoticons, or it's a semantic analysis, or showing a lot of positive emotions, or superb, a lot of positive words and expressions, it's flagged and tagged as a positive post, and vice versa. If it's using very negative words, or negative emoticons, or negative pictures, then it's negative. And we look at the balance, and that creates the scores. But beyond the numbers are interesting, but the most important is about the qualitative sentiment drivers. And this is where you can track potential ambassadors, which can be just an example for Disneyland. One of the reasons why they have restored their reputation very quickly is, of course, because they do a lot of positive communication pushed from their own touch points.
Sure.
But also they just realized, and they didn't know that, but the data showed that there's been a huge peak of positiveness during a specific moment, due to the fact that there has been a group of gaming fans who have recreated Disneyland parks on Minecraft. The game.
Sure.
And so sometimes you have fans you do just ignore, but they are doing the good reputation job for you, just free of charge as a destination. So that's the kind of things we are looking at. So everything that can possibly change your reputation, which sometimes can be very indirect.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, in the sentiment, things around politics or geopolitics obviously have an impact. You cannot really escape that. And so we do not only look at the content only mentioned by visitors or potential visitors, but also anything which is said about the place branding.
Great. Thank you very much. And I think that's a very thorough answer to the question that was asked. I want to ask a sort of follow-on to a point that came up with several points that you raised during the presentation. And this came through really strongly, actually, in hearing you say the presentation versus me reading it. And this is the idea that the first people to visit the destination will have an outsized impact on the sentiment based on what they post and what they share for future travelers. So we have representatives on call from corporates, from DMOs, NTOs, and SMEs. But thinking about it first from the destination level, and maybe we can drill down a little bit. What are some of the key things that a destination should do to make sure that those initial visitors have the great experience? Is there anything specific that they could do that you can recommend, or ways of thinking about this problem?
Well, of course, the only way to do is to ask people, to ask their feedback, and sometimes to prompt it. So it's obviously not time for any sales speech, but just so you know, we have developed a widget for automating post-visit survey with dealing with all experience rating, including sanitary index. So so you can understand what people are saying. and maybe control that before they're going
Sure.
to share if it's negative. So survey widget is one thing, and of course the social listening is another thing. But when we talk about social listening, we have actually two sources. The one is social at large, as I defined before, and the other
Yeah.
one is just focusing on travelers and guest reviews. So we are not the only one to do that, of course, but it's very important just to look at consolidating anything which is reviewed from guest experience point of view, all along the thousands of attractions, restaurants, hotels, information centers, and so on, transportations, what people are sharing on social web, either spontaneously, like in a tweet, or through rating platforms like TripAdvisor, whatever, Ctrip, and so on. And we have done already a lot of tests on, for example, great towers in Asia, or hotels opening again in Asia, or destinations opening again in Asia, because you are the guys, the one who have opened first. And
Sure.
it's very interesting. People are commenting a lot in reviews about COVID-19. It's usually quite positive. They are very well surprised by the high level of professionalism that hotel staffs, the care that people are the front line of the destination, frontline staff of destinations, the care they have about welcoming the visitors in a good way. But also we are hearing some negative comments about that, and the questions about social distancing and so on is very important. And saying that, it's one of the recall we have put, the 19 recall. The frontline staff is super important. They will have more impact than any communication campaign, because they are the one which have the physical contact with first COVID visitors. And one of the aspects that many destinations sometimes forget is not only to train the staff about the gel and the mask and social distancing, but it's also how to manage a problem between visitors when one visitor is very angry because another visitor is not respecting the rules. I was saying that relationship between the destination and visitors are a new kind, because you can imagine you respect the rule, but one of the fear we see from social listening is that whereas I will respect the rule, I'm not sure that the other will respect the rules. And so you can
Sure.
have, fights in your own hotels or attractions because people don't trust other people. It's just human nature. So training the staff about how to deal with problems like that will be very important as well, because it's a matter of creating the safe experience you need so people really enjoy the destination and the experience.
Thank you. So my two main takeaways from that are, first, whether or not somebody engages a firm like TCI to do it in general, or they're an independent operator of a hotel or a few hotels, they need to stay on top of their reputation immediately following open up, and somehow engage with their customers and their travelers to figure out what's going on. If there's negative sentiment, to try to catch it early and reshape it into a positive story and shore up their operations. The second takeaway from that answer that I have is related to the frontline staff. It's not only enough to equip them with the new safety protocols or the health protocols or any other policy, but also assist them with some of the actual either not necessarily crisis, but issue management that can come up as a result of these new policies and different issues that can happen between guests, travelers, etc. So good, thank you. This presentation had a focus on the destinations in Asia themselves, and more so how they can improve their reputation. We had a question. We actually had several questions before this, and it may be outside the scope of this, but I still wanted to ask, what do you think would be some of the most lucrative markets to target for a destination in Asia if they wanted to bring some inbound travelers? So we have, Vietnam, China, Singapore, etc., starting to open, looking at new travel bubbles, looking at opening up beyond those travel bubbles. Where should they be focused on their efforts, maybe as we get to a point of larger border openings?
Well, it's obviously, it all depends on the destination, of course. But I want to make it like a no-brainer. I mean, the priority is where people can travel from the beginning. It's probably a bit. It's two things. The first is a very short term, attracting people from the countries and the markets which the authorization and the possibility to travel is number one. This is why there's such a big shift on communicating towards the regional and the domestic markets. It's the best way. I mean, there's a lot of domestic competition going on right now all over the world. And so making sure that, as I said, through whatever promotions or campaigns, the very short-term domestic visitors will choose you and not your neighbors is probably, you know, competition is back. And then from international traveling point of view, of course, you need first to look at and to market where the markets are open again, because your brand reputation has been somehow damaged sometimes, sometimes not. But you think people are not forgetting completely about their dream to China, their dream to Australia. So it's just a matter of logistics today. Still, the market is 50% driven by the supply and conditions for traveling, and not by the demand. So I just mean there's a short term is just looking at where people are going to be able to travel again from, and then you capture your share, and then starting looking at the mid to long term about your brand image. And this is where the social sentiment is important. As I was mentioning, if you are operating in Asia, the long haul from Europe, it's going to take time before having the pre-COVID level of visitation from Europe, and vice versa. Chinese visitors in Paris, it's going to take time before, just because of travel conditions, but also because a bit of perceptions and sentiment. But for those, then you can spend a bit of money to start restoring your image, a bit less like call to action, but making sure that people understand that what happened in the past during the crisis in terms of place branding or place reputation is now has changed, and that in terms of attractiveness, sustainability, you are still leading the game. So, two terms, short terms, investing where people can travel from, obviously. What else? You're not going to spend money if your market is not open. And then the mid to long term is restoring your reputation overall. And then, as I was saying, in Europe, for example, UK, French, and probably if you're exposed a lot or dependent from the US market, in Asia, it's one of the markets which has been really damaged. But to me, post-crisis means short-term practical stuff. So it's about looking at travel conditions first and marketing where people can travel from.
Great, thank you. We are about to. It's just now on the hour. So with that, did you want to have any closing remarks or any key takeaway for somebody who's attended today's webinar with us?
Well, it's probably, I don't know, a message of hope. It's a message of hope. What we hear from social sentiment is that maybe contrary to some of the stuff we hear from, surveys, I don't know how many surveys are just on the market, and we have to be honest, surveying people today, you need to ask the right questions. Travel desire is still there. There is no reason why people should suddenly say, oh, I'm not going to travel from Europe to Asia anymore because of COVID-19. No, dreams are there. It's just a matter of waiting a bit. It will be a bit longer, but still a dreams are there, and the travel planning, the travel considerations are growing and growing. And so when people say there's a shift of the demand towards domestic and regional, it's a forced demand. It's just because they don't have any other choice. I'm not saying it's not going to take time to fully recover, but I'm just saying that from the pure consumer sentiment, people want to travel again. And so that's one of the key message. And the other is, it's nice to see competition back. It's nice to hear that some destinations like Japan are maybe envisaging to fund a bit your travel to come back, because it means it's back on track. But still, one of the lessons is to say that the COVID-19 has been, to me, not completely changed the set of mind. It does not completely change the way people will want to travel in the future. but still there are a couple of things that has been really enhanced, and especially sustainability is already existed before. It's going to be a major point of consideration for tomorrow, because social impact, environmental impact has been so much exposed during the crisis. So it was there, but it's still very much there. So anything you can do in terms of promoting that will be very important. And of course, I was saying now, it's still time to restore and to make marketing campaigns and advertising efforts about restoring brand as a whole, but focus on your iconic experiences. Focus on your brand DNAs. Which are the brand DNAs? Which are the celebrities or the chef who can talk about you in a very indirect way? Because the more you focus on very specific, iconic, and let's say non-purely tourism products, the more you can restore your reputation in the future. And along with that, working on your brand reputation overall, you really need to focus on your experience. And so the DMO is more than ever the effort to spend on, because again, it's all about the experience, and your reputation is all about the experience. It was the case before. It has never been more the case after the crisis.
Good. So demand is still strong. SSR will be increasingly more important going forward, the sustainability piece. Focus on restoring the brand by returning to the brand DNA now with a strong focus on the experiences. Olivier, on behalf of PATA, as well as the 105 participants that we have on call, I want to thank you for your time today. Really, this was an incredibly insightful presentation. Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to get to everybody's questions, but I think in the course of your presentation and your other answers, you've touched on many of the answers and the themes that they were looking for. So thank you very much for your time today. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
For our participants, our attendees, after this, we are going to get the slides from Olivier, and we will make sure that these are sent out and posted for everybody to see at a later date. So again, I'm Trevor Weltman at the Pacific Asia Travel Association. We thank everybody for their time today and look forward to catching up with you all, hopefully in person, in your destinations at a very soon point in the future. If not, we will catch up with you all again digitally in the near term. Thank you very much. Take care.